Okay, what's going on, everybody? Hope everyone's having a fantastic day. Before we introduce Charles, you already know inside of the chat itself, for people that are tuning in, let us know where you are tuning in from. And also, if you've had anything exciting happen this week so far, I know we're on a Tuesday, but maybe something exciting's happened to you. So let us know where you're tuning in from. So we'll get right into it. And then as we do that, as we bring up the screen, we're going to go through some slides today. We're talking about discovery, right? How to get better at discovery. And I was like, I don't think anyone is better on this topic than Charles. I feel this was a great topic to dive into and learn directly from him and learn what we can do to get in front of that, right? And so, with that being said, Charles, if you want to quickly introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll get into it.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Morgan. You are the man. And hopefully Morgan and I will meet in person at some point.
Yeah.
I am currently working at a company called Alpha Sense, responsible for up-leveling the skills of sales professionals in my vertical, where there are about 90 sales professionals. And of course, as Morgan mentioned, I focus on discovery all day, all night. And was an AE at a number of companies, and then stepped into this role as I found that I'm able to help a lot of people significantly enhance their conversations and enhance the probability of a win. So I'm excited to talk about this topic today.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm Morgan. Previously was at JB Sales, sales training, sales coaching, 4-time LinkedIn South Sales Voice, and now I have my own company, AMP, and we help companies generate pipeline generating content and also help Cognism with their content, which is why we're here. So we're excited to talk about discovery today. But before we do that, as people trickle in and everyone watching in, there's a question for you all. When it comes to discovery, one being like, meh, like I need to get way better. 5 being like you're elite. What would you rate yourself today? 1 through 5. What would you rate yourself? So let's just get a pulse check. Charles, what would you rate yourself?
Me?
Yeah, you got to rate yourself too.
Oh, gosh. I never feel like I'm good enough at discovery. That's the beauty of it. I think that the president of Toyota once said, "There's no best, only better."
Yep.
I'm gonna give myself a 1. Giving myself a 1.
A 1. Okay. So we got mostly we got people in here across the board. 3. It looks like 3s. 3.5. We got a 4.9. Maybe that's you, Charles. Maybe 4.9. You can always be better. Just keep yourself up on the 0.1. But what is this, right? What are we gonna learn today? So we're gonna learn 3 techniques. The pit stop technique. So that's gonna be mine. I'm gonna talk about that. Looking for trouble, share your experience. Those are Charles's. But someone asked a really good question here, and I actually want to go ahead and just put this up on the screen real quick so we can talk about it, because I do have a really good answer for this one. What is your definition of discovery? So, Charles, if you had to define it, what does it mean?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. I think the best way for me to explain it is to first explain what it doesn't mean versus explaining what it does mean. What it does not mean is me collecting information for me to determine whether or not this person is worth speaking to. That's what it does not mean. That definition is actually qualification. That's like qualifying somebody. What discovery actually means is starts with the same letter. What discovery actually means is disqualification, which means as opposed to the purpose of the call is for me to collect information. It's more about for me to empower the prospect to think and reevaluate what they are currently doing and what they're hoping to accomplish. That's what discovery actually is. It's not focused on me, but I'm focused on empowering the prospect to think and reevaluate and come to some sort of self-assessment. So I can work that into a concise definition, but that is how I think about discovery. If that resonates, Ronit.
Yeah, let us know if that was the answer you're looking for, or if you wanted a break down. But I think it was good to start with that. Okay, great. So they liked it. Charles, you can stay. They liked it. They liked it. Okay, so let's talk about the pit stop technique before we go any further. So, how many of y'all have ever seen or watched NASCAR? Charles, you're a NASCAR fan.
I could learn a lot more about NASCAR, admittedly.
So look, I've never seen a race, to be fair. So I only have, but for those of you who maybe are fans, you listen on the chat, or maybe you're not, whatever. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because in NASCAR, if you just study it, they typically run out, they do like 100 to 200 laps, right? And but within that, like obviously the tires are going to have rust, so they need to make sure that they do a pit stop. So based on the research I did, they do like 2 to 4 pit stops every single race. Now, why is that important? What happens is in discovery calls, when we actually do our discovery, which will Charles will kind of lead us through like some questions and what you can do here. You need to also make sure that you do a pit stop in your own call, right? And so people are saying Formula One's better. All right, cool. I haven't seen it. Maybe I'm gonna check it out. But you want to do your own pit stops on your own call. So let's say you run a 30-minute discovery, 15 minutes in, I always like to just get a pulse check to make sure I'm doing the right things. And as a rep, you should be doing the same thing too, because you may be actually going astray. You may not be going in the right direction, even though you think you are. So I'll say, hey, real quick, everybody, I just want to make sure we're heading in the right direction. So far, this is what I've heard, right? X, Y, Z. And then I say, hey, I just want to make sure, is all this accurate or am I missing something? Now, the key thing here is if they say, oh, that's accurate, sounds great, you now have gotten psychological confirmation bias and they have agreed to the problem you're looking to solve, which is the cornerstone of what we're trying to do here. So if you've done the right discovery and you've had the right pit stop, they'll all agree, like, yep, that's what we're looking for, Morgan. That's exactly it. Shows that you're listening, shows intention. Now they've agreed. Now you can layer down into those questions moving forward because now you understand that they actually need that. There could be another direction where they say, yeah, that's actually not it, and they tell you something different. But now you need to have another line of questioning moving forward to have better discovery going forward. So I wanted to share that pit stop. It's a small technique, yet very impactful, very powerful if used correctly.
Can I add to that as well, Morgan?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Guys, this pit stop technique, in my experience, even with the most experienced account executives, is one of the most underutilized things that salespeople do not take advantage of. And I think the beauty about the pit stop is if you ever do a mock role play, and you do the pit stop in the mock role play, even let's say if you're interviewing for a job, you don't necessarily realize how it feels on the other side of the line. So when you're doing a pit stop, the prospect it's a very refreshing feeling for the prospect, because prospects are not used to, people in general are not used to being heard. And when you're showing them that you're actually listening to what they're saying, even if you got it wrong, their resistance level goes way down, number one. And number two, it stops the prospect from multitasking, right? This is a technique that the prospect cannot multitask when you're doing this pit stop. They're required to biologically lean in and listen to what you're saying and correct you. And then they're much more engaged in the conversation. And I love that example that in NASCAR, they do 4 pit stops. You can never do enough of, got it, so it sounds like what you're saying is this, what I'm hearing is this, did I mess that up? You can't do enough of it. And it just goes such a long way. And I would highly encourage to not skip this.
Yeah, I love that additional context that you're there, Charles. And by the way, for anyone who has any additional questions, put them in the Q&A. We're going to answer them throughout if you have any questions in discovery. And you said something really important, right? It gets them to lean in, and that's what you want. Most people, when you are talking to them on discovery, are trying to lean out or get out, right? They ain't really trying to be on that call. So you want to get them to lean in, and this is a great way to show that you've been listening. And it's not just even on and there's always discovery happening, right? This isn't just on the first call. This is on all calls, right? I'm doing this pretty often. So whether Formula One fans, sounds like I need to get into that, but NASCAR, whatever, right? These are things that you can do to have these pit stops. So for Will, definitely go check that out and let us know how it goes. So that's my pit stop. If anyone has any questions on that, feel free to go in the chat, or Charles, you want to add to this, let us know. Otherwise, we can move to the next one.
Oh, this is great. I could talk about this for a while. This is wonderful.
Okay, so now let's looking for trouble. Like, wait, Charles, why are you looking for trouble? Well, talk to us about this one.
Yeah, looking for trouble is also a extremely underutilized skill in sales. As you can see here, it's asking what could go wrong that might stop you and the prospect from working together. There are many ways to look for trouble. In terms of looking for trouble, what we're looking to do is seek impediments to why we wouldn't be moving forward. So that could sound something like the following. Hey, Hassan, it sounds like you guys have a fair amount of interest in our offering. Not to put the cart before the horse here, but assuming the rest of your colleagues find value in our offering and the evaluation goes well or the conversations go well, what might come to mind what might come to mind on your end that you think would stop us from moving forward? It's different for everyone that I talk to, right? That's one way to do it. I was just coaching an AE. By the way, Morgan, you're welcome to interrupt me at any point. I was just coaching an AE who did it really, really well. He was speaking to a private equity firm, and he's selling an offering that is requires a trial to be conducted. And he asked the person who was in charge of managing the trial, and he asked her, by the way, it seems like the feedback thus far has been pretty positive. Assuming that doesn't change by the end of next week, is there a scenario where you feel like the partners would still shut this down, even though the feedback is positive across the board? Right. And I have another AE that I coach that actually brings up a menu of trouble. I posted about this yesterday, and he asks his prospects, hey, Bob, would it be okay if I maybe share some reasons why, even though people who like our offering, some reasons why we still don't end up moving forward with them? Would that be okay? And they say, sure. They say sometimes our prospective clients realize that there are competing priorities. This is really low on their list. That's one reason why we don't end up moving forward. Sometimes they realize they don't really have the budget in mind for an offering like ours, and that's something that they haven't really talked about internally. And a lot of times we didn't know that they're looking to actually replace a specific tool, and so we don't really get a chance to show what's different. Those are some things in my experience that have prevented us from moving forward with other folks in the past. Is there anything that comes to mind that you think would prevent us from moving forward, assuming that you do like our offering? Curious how you think about it. But it gets the conversation started. The way you ask it doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, the less perfect it is, the better, to be honest, because you just want to spark thought and spark conversation. This way, the prospect comes to you and says, well, if I had to think of something, it would probably be X, right? And that starts a new conversation around what that challenge might be, what the trouble might be. And then you have an excuse to bring that conversation up again. It helps do a couple of things. Number one, it helps you disqualify out much more quickly, saving yourself a lot of time. Number two, it helps you uncover the truth so that I'm sure many of us on this call thought a cycle was going really, really well, and all of a sudden we're blindsided. And we're told, yeah, we can't move forward because of XYZ reason. And we had no idea that that was something that the prospect had thought about. And that's just because we didn't ask. And I think that a lot of AEs are afraid to look for trouble because they're afraid that there is trouble. But that's a great
thing.
There
could be.
Yeah.
If there's trouble, then there's trouble. We got to go figure it out.
Yeah. Elvis Presley has a quote. He says that the truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a while, but it's always going to be there. So you want to make sure you get to it as quickly as possible.
I want to call out one thing or two things actually. So for everyone looking in, right? One, tell us in the chat if you're doing that, if you're looking for trouble, or maybe you're afraid to look for trouble. Maybe this actually helped you today. Let us know. And two is like, Charles, I like to call this like every salesperson, I'm curious if you agree with this. Every salesperson needs to be a healthy skeptic. You have to be. Like, don't be jaded where like you think everyone's out to get you, because then that doesn't really. I mean, like, sales can make you jaded. Let's be fair, but like, I've actually just learned at this point, I'm like a healthy skeptic. I'm like, all right, this sounds great, but like, I'm always digging for stuff, right? At the end of the call, I'll be like, hey, are there any concerns that I can address right now before we leave, right? So then I can talk about that. And to your point, that's what you're doing. It's like, what could go wrong here that I'm not even thinking about? Is there someone that you got to go talk to that's in the shadows that we haven't even spoken to yet? So those are things I found to be very interesting. And I think that could be obviously compelling to anyone as they're trying to figure out their discovery and get better.
Not only that, Morgan, I love what you just said. I actually encourage the AEs that I coach to actually literally share with prospects that they are healthy skeptics.
Yeah.
Because
Oh, even share.
Yeah, to share that. Like our prospects are, I'll show you what that sounds like. Because our prospects are just as skeptical as we are.
Mhm.
Well, they should be just as skeptical as we are, or we should be almost as skeptical as they are, right? So one of the AEs that I coach will say something like, of course, Morgan, you might be very familiar with this quote. I got it a long time ago from Question-Based Selling, but he'll say something like this. He'll say, Morgan, I always prefer to be more accurate than optimistic. I've been at my firm for some time now. A lot of my colleagues call me a healthy skeptic. We are a SaaS business, so the only way we grow is if our clients are happy, and they're happy if they're using our offering and they find value in it. Otherwise, they don't renew, and it doesn't really do any good for us and doesn't really do any good for you. So the purpose of this conversation is to make sure that you're comfortable with either moving forward or just as comfortable telling me that maybe you don't think it's for you, and that's okay as well. With that said, based on all the discussions that we've had today, keeping that healthy level of skepticism in mind, I guess to what extent do you feel like it's worth speaking further, or would you say this is really not for us and we should really part ways? Right. So that is a very healthy, just transparency. People love transparency. They're not used to that level of transparency from salespeople. And it also has a lot to do with always indirectly telling our prospects that this is about us too, right? Where you care about the growth of your business, we care about the growth of our business, and only both of our businesses are going to grow if this is a right fit. And if it's not a right fit, then that's okay. We can stop the conversation at this point, unless there's something that I may have missed. And people appreciate that. It's very, very refreshing, that level of directness. So sharing that we are healthy skeptics, you can't lose by sharing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out by sharing healthy skeptics, make sure that it actually makes sense at the end of the day. I think that's actually very spot on. So shout out to that. And if other people could take that advice. So I'm going to actually bring up this question here across the board. So we have two questions here. So this is from what I just talked about. How long does the average pit stop last? I'd probably say this is like 2 to 4 minutes, like, of you just sharing what's going on. This isn't anything crazy. Like, this is not a pit vacation. This is a pit stop, right? We're not here for like, hours and hours upon end. Like, this is really quick. Like, you're just saying, hey, Charles, so far, this is what I've learned. I've learned that your team is looking to improve in cold calling. We said that coaching might be the best route for that. We also said that some type of reinforcement moving forward would be best for that. And here's the ways that we're going to handle that. Is that accurate so far? Or am I missing something? That's just a random example, but you see where I'm going. It's like 2 to 4 minutes, and it's only going to be longer if like you completely miss something. Then they might bring up another thing, and then you just need to do discovery from there. But yeah, that pit stop is going to be 2 to 4 minutes. Okay,
yeah.
so
Can I add also? This is for
sure.
Was that Hassan that asked that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And also just for everybody for everybody listening, the beauty also about the pit stop is it really builds a lot of us struggle to be present in the conversation, and it really builds our curiosity muscle, and it actually forces us to ensure that we do not miss a beat, that we do not skip steps, that our recap is accurate and it's precise. It just does wonders for our own curiosity muscle building, and I can't stress enough how important these pit stops are. So Hassan, a pit stop could last for 10 minutes. There's no, you can't do it. You can't do it enough.
All right, so let us know if that was helpful there as well. And so I think Alan's question is more so for you. I think this is talking about when you were going through looking for trouble. So what if the prospect doesn't want to open up? What do you do here?
Assuming, Alan, your question means the prospect doesn't want to open up about looking for trouble. So let me say a couple things about this. There's like there are approaches we want to execute on to do as much as we can to prevent a prospect from not opening up.
Yep.
So that's what we should focus more on versus what if they don't open up. Because then the more you're able to prevent it, the higher probability that it just won't happen nearly as much.
Right.
That's the first thing I'll say. But the second thing I'll say is, what if the prospect doesn't want to open up about, let's say, looking for trouble? I'm going to say two things. One, we can all agree we can't control what our prospects are going to say or do or not say or not do. We have zero control over that.
Yeah.
At the same time, number two, if I'm sensing that the prospect doesn't want to open up about that, I will simply call it out, Alan, and that might sound something like this. Alan, I could be way off here. I'm sensing that you're somewhat hesitant about telling me what could stop us from moving forward. Am I off there? Right. I'm just calling it out very, very nicely, not making any accusations, just saying it's correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like maybe there's some hesitancy on your end to tell me what might stop us from moving forward. Am I off there? Or was it something that I did? You can always blame yourself. Was it something that I did? Did I ask that question in the wrong way? Right. I find that blaming ourselves also helps people want to save us as well. I find that, Alan, in sales, yes, we have to be professional, but being professional doesn't mean that we can't be vulnerable. And the more vulnerable we are about maybe something maybe I made a mistake, maybe I asked that wrong. I'm not sure I asked this. Maybe I asked that the wrong way. People's resistance level goes down, and they tend to be more honest with us and tell us the truth sooner rather than later. So I hope that answers your question, Alan, even though that wasn't just like a one-sentence answer.
Alan, let us know if that was helpful. All right, cool, y'all. So if you have more questions, put it more in the Q&A. We're answering Q&A as you see. But that looking for trouble, and I think one of the biggest things in looking for trouble is I would recommend for every single rep in here to challenge yourself to do that on every single call, right? Because it's hard to, and Charles, maybe you can speak to this one. I think it's hard for people to do that because once there is trouble, they feel like they aren't maybe skilled, they didn't do what they need to do. But it's better to figure this out now than get ghosted later on.
Yeah, I also want to say something else. Finding trouble doesn't mean that the deal is not moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
It just means we're both on the same page about what's reality versus what's fantasy sooner. So if the prospect says something like, there could be an issue with budget, that might be the only issue. That's a topic we can now discuss, where I can say, oh, can you help me understand what the budget is? Is it a cash flow thing? Is it a timing thing? Is it a priority thing? Can you help me understand what that means for you exactly? We can unpack the trouble and potentially, I'd say, even argue most likely, work something out that solves what they thought was an issue that's not really an issue. A lot of prospects have assumptions that because X, Y, Z is an issue for them, that the deal is not going to move forward. Meanwhile, they didn't realize that we could still move forward with a deal in spite of an obstacle that they thought they have. So looking for trouble doesn't mean the deal is not moving forward. It just means let's talk about what your hesitations are. Sometimes after a first call, as we all know, they'll say, let me get back to maybe talk to the team and I'll get back to you. And I'm going to immediately look for trouble over there in one of two ways. I can say, sure, can I ask when you bring this to the team, I guess what would be the number one pushback you think the team would have based on our offering Would they think it's not valuable? Would be price? Like, what do you think the number one hesitancy is going to be? Or I might say, sure, yeah, Bob, I could be very paranoid, and based on my experience here, whenever people tell me that, they're usually just not that interested in the conversation that we just had, which is totally okay. Is that the case here, or am I totally way off? We can totally part ways if that's the case right now. I just want to get to the truth, because our time is valuable. Our time is just as valuable as theirs.
I love that. And this actually leads to a question that Hannah has here, and then we'll move into the third piece that Charles is going to share. Would you be able to relate this to selling a service rather than a product? For context, we're selling an events venue in London and are struggling to get a client to open up on the initial call.
All of what we're talking about is completely 100% applicable to selling a service as much as it is to selling a product. Actually, most people that are in anybody that's in SaaS is technically selling a service, right? It's software as a service. So I'd probably argue that most of us are selling some sort of service, whether it's based on a product or just based on an event. The event is the product. And if I'm you, Hannah, and I find that people in my experience are very hesitant or reluctant to tell me the truth, I can actually just talk about that with prospects, right? They're not used to something like that. I might say, let's say I'm starting off a call with you, Hannah, and you're my prospect. I might say something like, even if my upfront contract, that's the beauty of the upfront contract. I might say something like, Hannah, the purpose of this conversation is to determine whether or not we're a fit to help you. Admittedly, I'll tell you just straight off the bat, we're not a fit to help everyone at all. Not everybody's a fit for us. We're not a fit for them. And so I know a little bit about you guys, certainly not a whole lot. You're welcome to ask me any questions you want. And then at the end of this call, if we feel there's not a fit, no big deal. And if we feel there's reason to speak further, we'll kind of talk about what the next steps might be from that. Does that work for you? And then I can say after that, and by the way, Hannah, I always prefer to be more accurate than optimistic. If it's okay with you, I may have some direct questions to ask you as well. Would that be okay, considering, depending on the question that I ask you, depending on what I ask, would that be okay as well, to ask you maybe some direct questions in the middle of the conversation? Sure. And also, Hannah, in the middle of the conversation, the more you ask permission to do things, the more you'll find that they'll lean in. And the more disarming, this is where disarming discovery comes into play, and using humbling disclaimers, which I know Morgan's very familiar with. All these different ingredients, these are different ingredients that you can use in the call. Hannah, I'm not really sure how to ask this question. You might hate me for asking this. You're welcome to tell me that you don't want to answer it, but can you help me understand why you think this is an issue? Right. So the more disarming you are with your questions, the higher the probability the prospect will be less reluctant to hold things back from you. So a lot of different ingredients that will help you execute that better.
Okay, hopefully that was helpful there for you, Hannah. Let us know. And now we're going to move into number 3 here, which is share your experience. So this will go back into the transparency, I believe. So walk us through this one, Charles.
Yeah, and there's a lot of overlap, right? A lot of these sales, even all 3 of these insights are overlapped in some some form. I find that sharing my experience with prospects is extremely helpful, especially when it comes to next steps. So I might say to Hannah, let's say a prospect's like not sure what to do next. I might say, Hannah, based on this conversation, can I make a recommendation? No one's going to say no. Say, sure. I'll say, I've been at my firm now for a couple of years or a couple months. I find typically at this stage in the conversation, people are still reasonably healthy skeptical about what we have to offer. It's the first time they've ever spoken to us. They haven't really seen our offering, and that's totally okay. With that said, I've also found that when people actually see it for themselves, they're able to make a much quicker determination as to whether or not this is a fit for them. If it's a fit for them, great. If not, you won't be the first, you won't be the last. Would it be a completely unreasonable idea to get your eyes on our platform, get your take on it, and if you don't want to talk to me afterwards again, that's okay? Would that be a terrible idea? It's a very disarming thing while sharing my experience. I could share I have an AE that just shared his experience to try to get the DM involved early. So that might sound something like this. Hey, Morgan, I've been at my firm for a couple years now. Whether or not this works for you, everybody that I speak to has a different kind of buying process. I've always found that whenever the person who is in charge of deciding whether or not to move forward, whenever that person doesn't have at least maybe even a 10-minute conversation with us so that they can ask us very direct questions about our offering and how we might help, things get lost in translation. There's a miscommunication. They think we're something we're not. And then we just don't end up moving forward. But for those conversations that we have had with people who wanted to decide whether or not they wanted to move forward with us, I've always found that the probability was higher that they would move forward. And so that's been my experience. Do you think that's a completely unreasonable idea? Right? So my experience, I find that prospects have a very difficult time pushing back on things that make sense.
Yeah.
When you give them a reason to do something next that actually makes logical sense to them, they'll typically be like, yeah, I get that. That makes sense to me. As opposed to saying, hey, the next step would be to include your decision maker on the phone to decide whether or not we move forward. That's typically how our process works. Like, no one cares. But when you provide a logical reason, you share your experience. This is what's happened to me in the past. I've been burnt in the past. And, that's the best way I recommend we move forward based on my experience. Do you think that's unreasonable? People tend to warm up a lot more to something like that. And the probability of moving forward is a lot higher.
I like that, giving people logical next steps, but that's not on you, right? It's like, hey, here's our process. It's like, no, typically this is just like what my experience has been. Here's what I've seen. I think that's something that's useful that everyone can use moving forward, so they feel like they actually can attribute to those techniques to make sure they're seeing success.
100%.
Awesome. All right, y'all. So let us know so far if this has been helpful. Let us know in the chat. And these 3 frameworks for discovery, right, that we just learned today. And so essentially, like, this is where we're going to have questions for the next 13 minutes. We're giving you all time to ask some questions because we said a lot, but you may have some questions on discovery. We had a lot of people put, from 1 to 3. So this is probably your time to ask a question on something discovery, or maybe you had a call and you're like, hey, something happened here. How can I get better? Let us know in the chat and in the questions if you have questions so we can drill into it and get the most out of it, right? So that's our main focus there. But I'd say, like, in terms of discovery, yes, it is being recorded, so you'll definitely have that. And again, if you have questions, throw it in the Q&A. But as people come up with their questions here, I would ask, like, what is the number one thing that people don't do in discovery that they should be doing more of?
You're probably going to say I'm biased by saying that the 3 things we discussed, the 3 things we discussed today, people rarely do. There's no question about it. If I were to add one more thing, the most important thing I'd say is as follows. I think as sales professionals, we underestimate how important it is to continuously remind prospects that they can tell us to go pound sand. I think that's not something that A, they're used to hearing, and B, used to hearing a lot. So probably some of you in your discovery calls, probably in your upfront contract, might say, and by the end of this call, if you don't want to talk to me anymore, that's okay. But that's probably the only time that people do that. People rarely, in the middle of a cycle, say something like, do you still think it makes sense to speak further, or should we stop talking? Right? You're always reminding people of that. I'll give you a very funny story. When I used to work at a previous company, when I first started working there, I had a great manager. And in my first 2 weeks of onboarding, every single day, at the end of the day, he wanted to meet just to see how I'm doing. And at the end of every day, after he asked me how my day was going, he'd always ask me the same question. You think you'll come back tomorrow? It's just hysterical.
Yeah. It's like, wait, what?
You think you'll come back to work tomorrow? Like, I'm like, yeah.
It's like, I mean, I guess.
But like the chance you're always giving people an out. Whenever you're always giving people an out, they just want to lean in and they trust you more, right? They're not forced to do anything. They're left to their own. Um, uh, uh, they're left to trust their own decision making, and we give them a feeling of control. And these are things that prospects are not used to. And
Yeah.
when they're not used to it, the more they'll appreciate you, the more the resistance level goes down. And that's something I'd like to harp on.
I love that. Here's a really good question. Thoughts on starting discovery on the first call or cold call versus scheduling the call formally? Charles, what's your thoughts on that?
If I understand your question correctly, Jason, starting discovery on the cold call, if I understand you correctly, I don't encourage doing discovery on cold calls. The reason for that is successful discovery happens like when you schedule a call with someone and they hop on that call, their mind frame, Jason, is okay, I'm ready now to have a conversation with Jason. And I'm going to have a conversation. I've agreed to have a call. I'm going to be present on this call as much as I possibly could. When you're calling somebody out of the blue, and a lot of times they want to get into a conversation with you, it's never, never, never as good because they're not ready for the conversation. You might have a cold call with prospects like, yeah, I could talk about it now. I still wouldn't want to talk about that now. They're not in the mind
It's
frame.
very rare where someone is actually excited for the discovery as well. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the
So
key.
I would definitely not encourage doing discovery on cold calls. It's very light questions, and then saying something like, "Jason, naturally, I caught you completely out of the blue. Can I recommend we talk about this more on a scheduled call instead of a cold call, so we can answer more questions directly and take it from there?" So that's something that I would highly not encourage to do in a cold call.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else agrees on that. I agree with that mostly. Like there are, and I will say there are very rare scenarios where a prospect is so leaned in and they are willing to chat, but you're gonna feel that. I would say like the large majority of the time, that ain't happening. like it's just not. It's just not. Wish,
Yeah.
but it's not. Okay, cool. So where you were looking at cold calling, which is why we were finding it difficult. So should you always recommend scheduling a call? I think that's just what we're saying is like schedule that call. They'll be more prepared. But Charles, I don't know if you to harp on that even more, but I think we kind of went on that.
Yeah, the way I think is a very healthy. Morgan talked about like being a healthy skeptic.
Healthy skeptic, y'all.
Yeah, a great approach to your head, like your approach to sales. A great approach is always asking the prospect, "Do you think it's worth talking more?" That's the purpose of every call. Do you want to talk more, or should we stop? Do you think it's worth having further conversations, or should we part ways? Do you think it's worth having further conversations, or are you guys ready to move forward at this point? That's just a great question to ask. Do you want to talk more? If you don't, you can tell me and we can just part ways. That is really the purpose of every call. It's not, and that once you have that approach, it's a very lightweight approach and it comes across very thoughtful and respectful on the prospect's end of the call because they're like, yeah, I do want to talk more. Okay, great. What should we talk about next? Or what would be the top two things you want to talk about next that we haven't covered today? So you're letting them drive a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So hopefully that helped answer that question. If anybody got more questions, definitely put them in here. I think one of the things is that we're learning here is that like I think from a discovery standpoint, it's three things, takeaways, right? One is the willingness to be uncomfortable because that's where you're going to get the answers. Two is ask those direct questions when you can. And three, I think another thing we're identifying is making sure that you're always doing that discovery. It's not just the first call, which I feel like that's where most people think it's just the discovery call. It's like the discovery is on.
Yeah, discovery never dies. Discovery is everywhere. It's from the beginning of the call, it's negotiating, it's absolutely everywhere.
Okay, so we got another question here. Could you give an example of scheduling a call when cold calling? We're looking to get in contact with clients who host events and want them to host them at our venue. So I'll dive into that. So essentially, when you're scheduling a call, when you're cold calling, you have to know when there is somewhat of a mutual interest that can move into the next step. So I'll just give a high level example because cold calls are there's so many various of ways you can close a cold call, so we just don't have time for that. But what I will tell you is like your goal is to introduce yourself, whatever introduction you want to do, and then you want to provide some type of value prop that's contextualized to them. You're based on that value prop, they're probably going to throw 2 to 3 objections at you that you need to handle. And then once you can handle that, you then lead to the close. That's like a typical cold call. It flows like that almost every single time for the most part. Now, when you're looking to close somebody, you just want to do essentially what Charles is saying, but it's way more condensed. So you're going to get to a point in a call where you can realize like there probably is a need here, and you say, hey, look, typically when people say that they have this X need, we like to schedule a call with them based on previous experience or whatever that is, right? And so now when I understand that they actually could move forward, I'm going to look to book the call right there. I'm going to look at my calendar. They have their calendar, and I'm going to look at them with them so that we can schedule the call at that moment. So booking a time on a cold call, to Sam's point, like when you call someone, you're looking to book the meeting, but you always want to have it as a natural next step. Hey, typically when I hear that, here's the next step, book time on the calendar. And that's the way that I go about booking the cold call, essentially.
I have nothing extraordinary to add to that.
Okay, I think so. This is a real question. Is there one key question you ask at the beginning of every discovery? Ooh, Charles, hard to answer because everything could be, there's so much that's happening in the calls, but do you have one key question? Well, I have one.
That's some question. Why don't you share yours first, Morgan?
Okay, so this question is looking for like extreme trouble. Like there's looking for trouble, and I look for extreme trouble. And I ask this like almost every single time. And a lot of people don't like to ask this question because it could go wrong for you. But like I inherently don't really care. Like I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So what I do is I say, hey, look, what happens if you don't make this decision? That's the question I ask almost every single time. Because if they tell me, hey, look, Morgan, if we don't make the decision, we're going to get fired, then you've uncovered your urgency. But they could also say, nothing really is going to happen if we don't make the decision, which means you have some work to do. So I ask that question almost every single time because it really tells me where I stand and where I can go from there. A lot of people don't like that question, though, because like they could just say nothing and then you feel stuck. You're not stuck. Now you need to do some work. So yeah, that's the one I use almost every single time.
Yeah, that's what I like about that question. It's like it's a nice gauging question. Like, where are you at? This way, I, the AE, can help better manage my time.
Right.
And Tariq, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, I apologize if I'm not. I would say that the number one thing I would require all of my AEs to ask, and you're probably very familiar with this already, but there is no discovery. I can't get into real, true discovery land unless I first share, and Morgan's obviously very familiar with this as well, unless I first share the reasons why people even bother speaking with us. So that might sound like this. That might sound like this, Tariq. Tariq, to give you some context, there are really two main reasons why people even want to bother talking to us. They kind of like fall into one of two camps, if you will. They're either in camp number one where they say, hey, Charles, we feel like we could be missing insights in our research process because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Or they fall into camp number two where they're like, we don't really care about that at all, but we care about saving a lot of time when it comes to our workflow or our process or what have you. Those are really the two reasons why people bother speaking to us. To what extent do you feel like those are compelling reasons for you to solve for at this point? Or would you say like you have that solved for and it's not really a big priority for you guys? Just curious how you guys are thinking about it today. Like something like that to kick off the conversation. Like people talk to us for these two reasons. If they're not big priorities for you, maybe we shouldn't we'll talk for like 5 minutes, but probably not the best idea for us to continue talking.
I like that gauge of interest, good frame, good set across the board. No, I think it's fantastic. And that leaves us 1 minute left. So are right on time. So Charles, let us know, where can people find you if they have additional questions or want to learn more about discovery and they want to get better at this craft?
Yeah, sure. Thank you again, Morgan, for having me. Everybody can find me on LinkedIn. You can find more information on discoverycoach.io. And I have a newsletter. You can just go on my LinkedIn. That says My Discovery Newsletter. You can just click on it and sign up for it. There's some free content there as well. And for those of you, I did create a discovery guide. It's extremely comprehensive. It's available as well. You'll see it on the newsletter. To the extent that you want to enhance your discovery skills, I talk about really every possible topic I can think of talking about in one kind of actionable guide. You're welcome to check that out as well. And that's all I have for you today, I guess.
Awesome. Well, Charles, appreciate your time. Hopefully everyone in the chat, you enjoyed this conversation today in discovery, and we'll see you all on the next one. Cheers, everybody.